Captain Tae-ho Kim stood on the observation deck of the New Seoul mining colony and watched the morning sun rise over the purple jungle of Kepler 442b. The planet had been home to 200 humans for 3 years now, and every morning still felt like a gift. The crystalline formations scattered across the landscape caught the light and threw rainbow patterns across the dense vegetation. Tae-ho had grown to love this wild place more than he ever expected. Dr. So-ra Park walked up beside him, holding her daily report tablet. She was the colony's chief scientist and had spent most of her time studying the strange crystals that made this planet so valuable. The formations seemed to store and amplify energy in ways that Earth scientists could barely understand. Her research could change everything about how humans used power. "The morning readings look good," So-ra said in her calm voice. "The crystal formations are more active today. I think we might be getting close to understanding how they work." Tae-ho nodded and took the tablet. The numbers meant little to him, but So-ra's excitement always came through in her careful explanations. She had discovered that the crystals could store massive amounts of energy without any visible technology. If humans could learn to use them, it would solve the energy crisis back on Earth. Lieutenant Bo-ram Lee's voice crackled through the communication system. She was in charge of colony security and rarely sounded worried, but today something was different. "Captain Kim, please come to the communications center immediately. We have an unknown contact approaching the system." Tae-ho and So-ra looked at each other. No ships were scheduled to arrive for another 6 months. The journey from Earth took almost 2 years, and every vessel was tracked carefully. They hurried through the metal corridors of the main building toward the communications center. Bo-ram was standing in front of the main display screen when they arrived. The image showed space around their planet with several large objects moving toward them. Engineer Dong-woo Choi was working at the sensor station, his face pale with concern. "How many ships?" Tae-ho asked. "7 large vessels," Dong-woo replied. "They're bigger than anything Earth has ever built. The energy signatures are completely unknown." Sergeant Ji-woo Nam entered the room behind them. She had served in Earth's military before joining the colony mission and was one of the few people with real combat experience. Her expression was grim as she studied the display. "Those are warships," Ji-woo said quietly. "The formation and approach pattern are clearly military." Bo-ram tried to open communication channels with the approaching vessels. She sent messages in multiple languages and even tried mathematical sequences that any intelligent species should understand. The ships continued their approach without responding. The vessels entered orbit around Kepler 442b within 2 hours. Up close, they were massive and frightening. Their surfaces were covered in what looked like armor plating, and weapon systems were clearly visible along their hulls. The design was nothing like human technology, more organic and flowing, like they had been grown rather than built. Finally, a response came through the communication system. The voice was harsh and mechanical, speaking English with a strange accent that made it sound like rocks grinding together. "Human settlement, you will surrender immediately. Resistance will result in destruction. You have one of your time units to comply." Bo-ram tried to respond. "This is New Seoul Colony. We are peaceful miners and scientists. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions." "We are the Vorthak Empire. This world now belongs to us. Surrender or die." Tae-ho felt his stomach drop. The colony had no military defenses except for some basic security equipment. They were miners and scientists, not soldiers. The Vorthak ships could probably destroy the entire settlement from orbit without any effort. "We need to evacuate," Ji-woo said immediately. "Get everyone into the jungle while we still can." "What about our research?" So-ra asked. 3 years of work? Better to lose the research than lose our lives, Tae-ho replied. He activated the colony-wide emergency system. Alarms began sounding throughout the settlement. The evacuation procedures had been practiced many times, but no one had expected to use them for an alien attack. Colonists grabbed emergency supplies and headed for the predetermined escape routes into the jungle. The dense vegetation that covered most of the planet would provide cover from orbital weapons. Dongwu worked frantically to save critical data and equipment. He downloaded research files onto portable drives and gathered communication devices that might work away from the main power grid. His hands shook as he realized how little time they had. Botanist Hyojin Yu helped guide families toward the safest jungle routes. She knew the local plant life better than anyone and could identify which areas would provide the best cover. Her knowledge of the ecosystem had seemed academic before, but now it might save lives. Medic Subin Kang made sure the medical supplies were distributed among the evacuating groups. She organized the medicine and equipment so that each group would have basic medical support even if they became separated. The Vorthak ships began firing just as the last colonists disappeared into the jungle. Massive energy beams struck the main settlement buildings, turning metal and concrete into clouds of superheated vapor. The attack was precise and overwhelming. Within minutes, nothing remained of the structures that had been home to 200 people. Hunter J. Sung led one of the refugee groups deeper into the jungle. He had grown up hunting on Earth and understood how to move quietly through dense vegetation. His experience tracking animals would now be used to help humans avoid being tracked by aliens. Artist Min Ho Bei carried supplies for a family with young children. His understanding of colors and visual perception helped him spot good hiding places among the strange purple and green plants. He began to think about how the alien eye might see differently than human vision. From their hiding spots, the colonists could see Vorthak ground forces landing near the destroyed settlement. The aliens were tall and reptilian, walking upright on powerful legs. Their skin looked like leather armor, and they carried weapons that glowed with energy. Most disturbing were their eyes, large and unblinking, constantly scanning the environment. Captain Tae-ho Kim organized the scattered groups using hand signals and quiet movements. The communication devices still worked, but using them might give away their positions. He had to coordinate 200 frightened people without making any noise that the aliens might detect. Tracker Yuri Song moved between the groups, carrying messages and checking on supplies. She had learned tracking skills as a hobby on Earth, but the alien environment tested her abilities. The purple jungle had different sounds and smells than Earth forests. The Vorthak soldiers moved through the jungle with confidence. They carried devices that scanned for heat signatures, motion, and energy sources. Their technology was clearly advanced. The scanners could detect tiny amounts of electrical activity and track movement through dense vegetation. Dr. So-ra Park and Dong Wu studied the alien scanning devices from a distance, trying to understand how they worked. If the humans could learn the detection methods, they might find ways to avoid being discovered. Their scanners are looking for specific signatures, So-ra whispered to Dong Wu. Bioelectrical activity, heat patterns, metal objects, but they seem to be calibrated for their own technology. Sergeant Jiwoo Nam watched the alien patrol patterns and realized something important. The Vorthak moved like they expected to find an enemy that would fight in familiar ways. Their tactics were designed for conventional warfare against opponents who used similar technology and fighting methods. Electronics specialist Woo Jin Han worked quietly to modify their communication devices. If the alien scanners could detect standard electronic signals, the humans would need to use different frequencies or methods to stay in contact. Teacher Hanul Kim kept the children calm and quiet. Many families had been separated during the evacuation, and the children were frightened by the destruction of their homes. She told them quiet stories and games to keep them distracted from the danger. As night fell over the purple jungle, the Colonists faced their first night as refugees on their own planet. The Vorthak had established a perimeter around the destroyed settlement and were clearly planning to hunt down the surviving humans. Their technology seemed overwhelming, but Jiwoo Nam had noticed something that gave her hope. The aliens were hunting like they expected to find an enemy that would behave in predictable ways. They had probably conquered other species using the same methods, overwhelming force followed by systematic hunting of survivors. But those other species had never learned to hide the way humans could. Earth's history was full of warfare, hunting, and survival in hostile environments. Humans had developed camouflage, stealth, and deception into art forms. The Vorthak had better technology, but they had never faced an enemy that could simply disappear. The first day of the invasion was ending, but the real war was just beginning. Dr. Sora Park crouched behind a fallen tree trunk and studied the Vorthak scanning device that engineer Dongwoo Choi had managed to recover from an abandoned alien patrol site. The device was still active, its display showing energy patterns and heat signatures across the jungle. They had been hiding for 3 days, and the aliens seemed to be having trouble finding the scattered human groups. "Look at these frequency patterns," Sora whispered to Dongwoo. "Their scanners are designed to detect specific types of biological and technological signatures, but they're calibrated for species that use different energy sources than humans." Dongwoo pointed to the display readings. "The thermal sensors are looking for heat patterns that don't match human body temperature, and the motion detectors are set to track movement patterns from larger, heavier creatures." The Vorthak had conquered 17 different species before, arriving at Kepler 442b, but none of those species had developed advanced camouflage techniques. Their victims had been civilizations that fought with energy weapons and metal armor, making them easy to detect with standard military scanners. Sergeant Jiwoo Nam gathered a group of colonists around a small clearing deep in the jungle. She had served with Earth's special forces and understood how to use terrain and natural materials for concealment. Her knowledge had seemed unnecessary on a peaceful mining colony, but now it might save everyone's life. "The key is understanding what their sensors can and cannot detect," Jiwoo explained quietly. "We need to mask our heat signatures, reduce our electrical emissions, and move in ways that don't trigger their motion detectors." Botanist Hyejin Yu had been studying the local plant life for 3 years and knew which materials could be used. For camouflage, the purple jungle contained plants with unusual properties. Some absorbed heat, others reflected light in strange ways, and many had strong scents that could mask human odors. These mud deposits contain minerals that block thermal radiation, He Jin said, showing the group how to apply the thick purple mud to their skin and clothing. "And this plant sap changes color depending on the light, making it perfect for visual camouflage." Medic Subin Kang worked with He Jin to develop methods for reducing human biological signatures. By controlling breathing patterns and body temperature, they could make themselves harder to detect with alien sensors. She taught techniques for slowing heart rate and minimizing movement during scanning sweeps. The colonists split into small groups of 8 to 12 people, each led by someone with relevant survival skills. Hunter Jae-sung, Oh took charge of a group that specialized in silent movement through dense vegetation. His experience tracking animals had taught him how to move without disturbing the environment in detectable ways. "Walk on the balls of your feet, not your heels," Jae-sung instructed. "Test each step before putting your full weight down. Avoid breaking branches or disturbing leaves in regular patterns. The aliens are looking for signs of intelligent movement." Artist Minho Bae used his understanding of visual perception to help his group create effective optical illusions. He studied how the alien eyes might process color and shape differently than human vision. His artistic training in color theory and visual composition became tools for survival. "Their eyes are larger than ours and positioned differently," Minho observed. "They probably see a wider spectrum of light, but that also means they might miss subtle camouflage that works against human vision." Captain Tae-ho Kim moved between the groups, coordinating their activities without using electronic communication. They developed a system of natural markers, arrangements of stones, bent twigs, and disturbed earth that looked random but carried specific meanings for the human groups. Electronics specialist Woo Jin Han worked to create false sensor readings that would confuse Vorthak scanning equipment. He used salvaged electronic components to generate heat signatures that mimicked local wildlife, creating decoy signals that drew alien patrols away from human hiding spots. If we can make their scanners see what we want them to see, we can control where they look, Woo Jin explained to his technical team. A small heat source that moves like a native animal will seem more interesting than empty jungle. The Vorthak search patterns became increasingly frustrated and aggressive. Their commanders had expected to locate and capture all human survivors within the first day, but the thermal and motion scans kept showing empty jungle where intelligence. Reports suggested large groups should be hiding. Commander Veltar studied the search reports from his flagship and could not understand the results. His forces had conquered civilizations with much more advanced technology than these primitive human miners. Yet somehow the humans had vanished completely, leaving no trace that his best hunting units could follow. Teacher Han-nol Kim organized the children into scout teams that could move through the jungle almost invisibly. Their smaller size and natural agility allowed them to observe Vorthak positions from incredibly close distances. Student Yejin Lee discovered she could remain perfectly motionless for hours while watching alien patrol patterns. The adults make too much noise when they move, Yejin whispered to Han-nol. But we can get close enough to count their weapons and see what equipment they carry. Farmer Dae-hyun Park used his knowledge of ecosystem patterns to create elaborate misdirection campaigns. He arranged false trails that led alien patrols to empty clearings while the real human groups moved in completely different directions. His understanding of how plants and soil responded to disturbance became a tool for deception. The first successful ambush happened on the fourth day when Lieutenant Bo-ram Lee led a team against an isolated Vorthak patrol unit. The aliens were following what they thought was a human trail through a narrow valley between crystal formations. Bo-ram's team had been waiting motionless for 6 hours, covered in mud and plant materials that made them invisible to both thermal and visual detection. When the Vorthak patrol passed directly beneath their hiding spots, the humans dropped nets woven from local vines and used improvised clubs to knock the aliens unconscious. The patrol unit simply disappeared. Their communication devices went silent. Their scanners stopped transmitting, and search teams found only empty jungle where 6 heavily armed Vorthak soldiers should have been. The humans had dragged the unconscious aliens into cave systems hidden behind the crystal formations. Tracker Yuri Song developed techniques for moving through terrain that the reptilian Vorthak found nearly impossible to navigate. The aliens were larger and heavier than humans, with different joint structures that made them clumsy in dense vegetation and vertical terrain. They move like they're used to open ground and structured environments, Yuri observed. In thick jungle and rocky areas, they're almost helpless compared to humans. Psychologist Dr. Yoon-young Cho studied Vorthak behavior patterns and identified psychological weaknesses that could be exploited. The aliens showed signs of stress when their expectations were violated repeatedly. Their hierarchical military structure made them inflexible when facing unexpected situations. They're used to conquering species that fight back in predictable ways, Yoon-young explained. When their standard tactics don't work, they become confused and make mistakes. Mechanic Sang-ho Yoon began sabotaging Vorthak equipment in ways that appeared to be random mechanical failures. He could approach alien vehicles and scanning stations without being detected, then introduce subtle problems that would cause systems to malfunction hours later. The sabotage campaign made the aliens increasingly paranoid about their own technology. Equipment failures seemed to happen randomly, with no pattern that suggested intelligent interference. Yet the failures always occurred in areas where humans were supposed to be hiding. Scout Team Leader Ja Young Shin organized a week-long psychological Operation against a forward Vorthak base. Her team created sounds and movements that suggested supernatural activity, whispers that seemed to come from empty air, equipment that moved by itself, and shadows that appeared and disappeared without explanation. The Vorthak soldiers at the base began reporting encounters with invisible entities that defied their understanding of physics. Their scanners detected no life signs, yet objects moved and sounds occurred that could only be explained by intelligent activity. The stress of fighting an enemy they could not see or understand began to break down military discipline. Sound engineer Si-Hee-An used the jungle's natural acoustics to create voices that seemed to come from within Vorthak ranks. By positioning herself in specific locations and using the echo patterns created by crystal formations, she could make it sound like alien soldiers were speaking from positions where no one was standing. Illusionist Tae-Young-go had performed magic shows for entertainment back on Earth, but now his understanding of visual deception became a weapon. He could create human silhouettes that appeared and disappeared like hallucinations, making Vorthak sentries question their own senses. The psychological pressure on the alien forces increased daily. Units reported contact with human groups that vanished without trace. Equipment malfunctioned in patterns that suggested sabotage, but security scans found no evidence of intrusion. Soldiers began to fear that they were fighting an enemy with supernatural abilities. Electronics specialist Woo Jin Han crouched in a hidden cave behind one of the larger crystal formations, surrounded by salvaged Vorthak equipment and improvised electronic devices. He had spent 2 weeks learning how the alien technology worked, and now he was ready to turn it against them. The Vorthak scanners were sophisticated, but they followed predictable patterns that could be manipulated by someone who understood their programming. Their thermal sensors can be fooled with heat sources that move in biological patterns, Woo Jin whispered to his assistant, former communications technician Young-Suk Ma. I can make a single human heat signature appear like a herd of large animals or create phantom readings that show movement in completely empty areas. Young-Suk helped him position the electronic decoys throughout the jungle. Each device could generate false signals that would draw Vorthak patrols to predetermined locations while the real human groups moved in safety. The aliens would chase. Readings that showed dozens of humans in areas where nothing existed except electronic illusions. Teacher Ha Neul Kim had discovered that the colony children were extraordinarily gifted at moving unseen through the alien-occupied areas. Their natural curiosity and smaller size allowed them to gather intelligence by observing Vorthak camps from distances that adults could never achieve. Student Yejin Lee had become legendary among the resistance for her ability to remain motionless for entire days while watching enemy activities. The grown-ups breathed too loud and their hearts beat too fast, Yejin explained to Hanyul during one of their planning sessions. But we can get close enough to see what buttons they push on, their machines, and what words they say when they talk to each other. The children had mapped every Vorthak patrol route, identified the locations of scanning equipment, and even learned to recognize individual alien soldiers by their movement patterns. Their intelligence reports were more detailed than anything a conventional military force could have gathered. Farmer Dae-hyun Park used his deep understanding of the local ecosystem to create elaborate deception campaigns that confused alien search efforts. He could arrange disturbances in soil and vegetation that created false trails leading to empty clearings, while carefully erasing any signs that might lead to actual human hiding spots. Plants and animals leave specific patterns when they move. Through an environment, Dae-hyun explained to his team. I can make it look like large groups of humans pass through areas where no one has ever been, and make real human trails disappear completely. His misdirection campaigns were so effective that Vorthak search teams regularly found themselves following detailed tracks that led nowhere. The aliens would spend entire days pursuing what appeared to be obvious human signatures, only to discover empty jungle at the end of elaborate false trails. Commander Veltar stood in the command center of his flagship and studied reports that made no logical sense. His forces had been hunting primitive human miners for 3 weeks, but had captured exactly 0 prisoners. Units reported contact with human groups that vanished without explanation. Equipment malfunctioned in ways that suggested sabotage, but security scans found no evidence of intrusion. How can 200 humans simply disappear? Veltar demanded from his intelligence officers. They have no advanced technology, no military training, no defensive installations. They should have been captured within days. The Vorthak had conquered 17 civilizations using identical tactics. Overwhelming orbital bombardment followed by systematic ground operations to capture survivors. Every previous enemy had behaved in predictable ways, fighting with conventional weapons or attempting to hide using standard concealment methods. But the humans seemed to possess abilities that defied rational explanation. Psychologist Dr. Yoon-Young Cho had been studying Vorthak psychology through careful observation of captured equipment and behavioral patterns. The aliens showed clear signs of hierarchical thinking and territorial behavior that could be exploited by unconventional tactics. Their military doctrine was rigid and inflexible, making them vulnerable to psychological warfare. They expect enemies to behave according to their previous experiences, Yoon-Young explained to Captain Tae-ho Kim during a secret meeting in a crystal cave. When those expectations are consistently violated, their stress responses create increasingly poor decision-making. She developed specific psychological operations designed to exploit Vorthak mental vulnerabilities. The aliens relied heavily on territorial markers and predictable behavior patterns. When these expectations were violated repeatedly, their confidence in their own abilities began to collapse. Mechanic Sang-ho Yoon had perfected the art of sabotaging Vorthak equipment in ways that appeared to be random mechanical failures. He could approach alien vehicles and scanning stations without triggering any security alerts, then introduce subtle problems that would cause critical systems to fail hours or days later. The key is making the sabotage look like normal equipment failure, Sang-ho explained to his team. If they think their technology is unreliable, they'll start questioning everything instead of looking for human interference. His sabotage campaigns created a cascade of problems throughout the Vorthak forces. Communication systems developed, intermittent failures that isolated units from command. Vehicle engines stopped working in remote locations where rescue was difficult. Scanning equipment produced false readings that sent search teams in wrong directions. Scout team leader Jae-Young Shin had spent a full week orchestrating psychological operations against a forward Vorthak base, creating an atmosphere of supernatural terror that drove the alien soldiers to near madness. Her team could create sounds and movements that suggested paranormal activity, making equipment appear to move by itself and generating whispers that seemed to come from empty air. The Vorthak. Soldiers at the targeted base began filing reports about encounters with invisible entities that defied their understanding of physics. Security cameras recorded objects moving without visible cause. Audio sensors detected voices speaking in areas where no life signs could be detected. The accumulated psychological pressure broke down military discipline and created panic among the ranks. Sound engineer Si-hee Ahn used the jungle's unique acoustic properties to project voices that appeared to come from within Vorthak formations. The crystal formations created echo chambers and resonance patterns that could make sounds seem to originate from positions where no one was standing. She could make it appear that alien soldiers were speaking from locations where thermal scans showed empty space. The crystals amplify and redirect sound waves in predictable patterns, Si-hee explained. If I position myself correctly and modulate my voice properly, I can make it sound like someone is standing right next to a Vorthak soldier when I'm actually hundreds of meters away. Her acoustic illusions created paranoia and confusion within alien ranks. Soldiers reported hearing orders from commanders who were not present. Equipment operators heard technical instructions from positions where no technicians were standing. The psychological impact was devastating to military cohesion. Illusionist Tae Young-go applied advanced visual deception techniques that made human silhouettes appear and disappear like hallucinations. His understanding of how perception worked allowed him to create optical illusions that were perfectly calibrated to exploit Vorthak visual processing. Alien sentries began reporting human figures that vanished when directly observed. Their eyes are structured differently than human eyes, but they still process visual information through predictable neural pathways, Tae-young explained. I can create visual stimuli that trigger their perception systems without actually showing them anything real. The combination of electronic warfare, psychological operations, and physical sabotage began to have cumulative effects on Vorthak military effectiveness. Units refused to enter certain areas after entire squads simply vanished, without explanation. The humans had learned to render unconscious Vorthak soldiers completely invisible to their own rescue teams by hiding them in locations that defied detection. Dr. So-ra Park made a breakthrough discovery about the planet's crystal formations that revolutionized human concealment capabilities. The unique mineral structures generated electromagnetic fields that could completely scramble Vorthak scanning technology, creating zones where human signatures became entirely undetectable to alien sensors. The crystals don't just interfere with their scanners, So-ra explained to the Resistance leadership. They create actual cloaking fields that render anything within their influence completely invisible to Vorthak detection methods. Geologist Hwan-suk Ryu mapped the crystal field patterns across the entire jungle, identifying corridors and zones where humans could move with perfect concealment. These natural cloaking areas became highways for resistance operations, allowing strike teams to approach alien positions through channels of complete invisibility. The Vorthak forces found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to exist outside. The laws of physics. Human attack teams could approach within meters of alien positions without triggering any sensors. Equipment disappeared from secured storage areas without leaving any trace of intrusion. Patrol units encountered resistance. Fighters who appeared from apparently empty ground. Captain Tae-ho Kim stood in the crystal cave that served as the Human Resistance Command Center and studied intelligence reports gathered by the children's scout teams. After 4 weeks of defensive operations, the time had come for coordinated, offensive action. The colonists had learned to move like shadows and strike like ghosts, but now they would hunt their hunters with systematic precision. We've proven that we can hide from them and sabotage their equipment, Tae-ho said to the assembled team leaders. Now we're going to eliminate their leadership structure piece by piece while maintaining complete invisibility. Strategist In-soo Jang had developed a comprehensive plan to target Vorthak command personnel using the crystal cloaking fields and advanced camouflage techniques. The aliens still had no idea how human concealment worked, making their officers vulnerable to precision. Strikes that would appear to come from empty air. Their command structure is hierarchical and rigid, In-soo explained. If we remove key officers in sequence, their remaining forces will become confused and disorganized. They depend on central coordination more than individual initiative. Sniper team leader Moon Young Kwan had constructed improvised weapons using salvaged materials and local resources. Her rifles used crystals as focusing elements for energy beams, creating weapons that left no identifiable signatures. The Vorthak would be unable to determine weapon types, firing positions, or escape routes when their officers began disappearing. The crystal-focused energy beams don't register on their sensors as weapons, Moon Young explained to her sniper teams. To their equipment, it looks like natural energy discharges from the planet's geological formations. She positioned her snipers in crystal cloaking zones throughout the jungle, creating a network of invisible marksmen who could eliminate targets without ever being detected. Each shot would appear to be a random energy discharge rather than a deliberate attack. Demolitions expert Kyung-ho Lim had learned to create explosive devices using local materials that Vorthak sensors could not classify as weapons. The planets. Unique chemistry allowed him to combine native compounds into powerful explosives that appeared to be natural mineral formations until triggered. Their scanners are looking for conventional explosive compounds and metal components, Kyung-ho explained while demonstrating his techniques. These devices use organic chemistry and crystalline structures that read as harmless geological samples. His demolitions teams began targeting Vorthak supply convoys and communication installations. Vehicles would suddenly disappear into sinkholes that seemed naturally formed. Communication arrays would suffer catastrophic failures that appeared to be caused by equipment malfunctions rather than sabotage. The psychological operations escalated to levels that pushed Vorthak soldiers toward complete mental breakdown. Sound engineer Si-hee-on used the jungle's acoustic properties to create voices that seemed to come from within alien formations, while illusionist Tae-young-go employed visual deception techniques that made human silhouettes appear and disappear like supernatural manifestations. "We're not just hiding from them anymore," Si-hee explained during a tactical briefing. "We're making them question their own senses and their understanding of reality." The acoustic illusions became increasingly sophisticated. Si-hee could make it sound like dead Vorthak officers were giving orders from beyond the grave, or create conversations between alien soldiers who were actually separated by kilometers. The psychological impact destroyed unit cohesion and created panic throughout the alien forces. Dr. So-ra Park had perfected the use of crystal formations to create natural cloaking fields that rendered humans completely invisible to Vorthak technology. Strike teams could approach enemy positions through corridors of perfect concealment, appearing at point-blank range without triggering any detection systems. The electromagnetic interference from the crystals doesn't just block their scanners, So-ra explained. It creates actual distortion fields that bend light and energy around anything within their influence. Geologist Hwan Seok-ryu had mapped every crystal formation across the jungle, creating detailed charts that showed safe approach routes to any Vorthak position. The resistance fighters could move through an invisible highway system that connected every part of the occupied territory. Assault Team Leader Bitna Cho led the most audacious operation yet attempted, a coordinated attack on the main Vorthak command post using multiple strike teams approaching through different crystal cloaking corridors. The aliens would find themselves under siege from enemies that appeared to be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. "We'll hit them from 6 directions at once," Bitna explained to her team leaders. "They won't be able to track our positions or predict our movements because their sensors will show nothing but empty jungle." The attack began at dawn when the crystal formations were most active. Bitna's teams emerged from the cloaking fields like ghosts, materializing from thin air. They struck communication arrays, power generators, and defensive positions before vanishing back into invisibility. The Vorthak defenders found themselves fighting an enemy that violated every principle of conventional warfare. Weapons fire seemed to come from empty space. Equipment exploded without warning. Personnel disappeared without leaving any trace that rescue teams could follow. Commander Veltar watched his command post dissolve into chaos as invisible enemies, struck from impossible angles. His tactical displays showed no hostile contacts, yet his forces were being systematically destroyed by attackers who seemed to exist outside the reach of detection technology. "How can we fight an enemy we cannot see?" Veltar demanded from his communications officer. "Our sensors show nothing, but my soldiers are being killed by weapons that fire from empty air." The communications expert Young-suk Ma had been monitoring Vorthak transmissions and intercepted orders for orbital bombardment of the entire jungle. The alien commander had decided that conventional ground operations were hopeless against an enemy with supernatural abilities. "They're planning to glass the entire surface from orbit," Young-suk reported to Captain Tae-ho Kim. Veltar has concluded that the only way to eliminate the human resistance is to destroy the entire planetary ecosystem. This intelligence forced the resistance to consider their most desperate option. If the Vorthak were willing to destroy the planet rather, than face continued harassment from invisible enemies. The humans would need to take the fight directly to the alien ships themselves. Tech specialist Hyojin Yoon had been studying Vorthak ship systems through intercepted technical data and captured equipment. The alien vessels used similar detection technology to their ground forces, which meant the same camouflage techniques that worked in the jungle might be effective inside enemy ships. Their internal security systems are designed to detect external threats, Hyojin explained. They're not configured to find enemies who are already inside and using advanced concealment methods. Special Operations Leader Junho Baek began planning infiltration missions against the Vorthak fleet. If human strike teams could board the alien ships using the same invisibility techniques that had proven effective on the ground, they might be able to disable the vessels from within. "We've learned to become invisible in their scanning systems," Junho said during the mission briefing. "If we can get aboard their ships, we should be able to move through their corridors without being detected by internal sensors." Saboteur. Mi Young-song prepared explosive charges using the same crystal-based technology that had proven undetectable to Vorthak equipment. The devices could be placed throughout enemy ships and triggered simultaneously to cause catastrophic damage that would appear to be system failures rather than sabotage. The infiltration teams began their approach to the Vorthak fleet using small craft that had been modified with crystal cloaking technology. The electromagnetic fields generated by the alien detection systems actually helped to mask the human vessels, creating blind spots in orbital scanning networks. Tracker Yuri Song led the first boarding team through maintenance airlocks that Vorthak sensors could not adequately monitor. The aliens had designed their ships to defend against external attacks, not infiltration by enemies who could render themselves invisible to detection equipment. Once inside the alien vessels, the human infiltrators discovered that their camouflage techniques were even more effective in controlled environments. The Vorthak had never encountered enemies who could move through their own ships without triggering any security alerts. Electronics specialist Wu Jinhan began disabling ship systems from within, creating cascading failures that appeared to be random malfunctions. Navigation computers developed targeting errors. Life support systems showed phantom readings. Communication arrays began transmitting false data. The psychological impact on Vorthak crews was immediate and devastating. Their ships were experiencing impossible system failures that suggested sabotage, but internal security scans detected no unauthorized personnel. Equipment operated incorrectly, but diagnostic systems found no mechanical problems. Mechanic Sang-ho Yoon planted subtle sabotage. Devices throughout the enemy fleet using the same techniques that had proven effective against ground-based equipment. Communications expert Young-suk Ma crouched in the Crystal Cave Command Center, monitoring Vorthak fleet transmissions with growing alarm. Commander Veltar had made a desperate decision that would doom every living thing on Kepler 442b. Rather than continue fighting an enemy he could not understand, the alien commander had ordered orbital bombardment of the entire planet's surface. "They're going to sterilize the entire world," Young-suk reported to Captain Tae-ho Kim. "Veltar has concluded that conventional warfare is hopeless against enemies with supernatural abilities. He's planning to destroy the planetary ecosystem, rather than admit defeat." Tae-ho studied the intercepted battle plans and realized that hiding in jungle caves would not protect the colonists from orbital weapons designed to crack planetary crusts. The crystal formations might provide some protection, but a determined bombardment would eventually penetrate any natural shelter. "We can't hide from weapons that can destroy continents," Tae-ho said to the assembled resistance leaders. "If we're going to survive this, we need to take the fight directly to their ships." The plan that emerged from the emergency leadership meeting was the most audacious operation in human military history. Rather than attempting to escape or find better hiding places, the colonists would use their mastery of invisibility to infiltrate and capture the Vorthak fleet from within. Special Operations Leader Junho Baek had been planning infiltration missions for weeks, but the orbital bombardment deadline forced immediate action. His teams would need to board multiple alien vessels simultaneously and disable them before the bombardment could begin. "We've proven that their internal sensors can't detect us any better than their ground-based equipment," Jun-Ho explained. "If we can get aboard their ships in sufficient numbers, we should be able to take control of their entire fleet." The infiltration began with modified shuttles that used crystal cloaking technology to approach the Vorthak fleet without detection. Electronics specialist Woo Jin Han had configured the electromagnetic fields to create blind spots in orbital, scanning networks, allowing human vessels to reach the alien ships unobserved. Tech specialist Hyojin Yoon led the first boarding team through maintenance airlocks that Vorthak security systems could not adequately monitor. The aliens had designed their ships to defend against external attacks by conventional enemies, not infiltration by opponents who could render themselves invisible to all detection methods. Inside the Vorthak vessels, the human infiltrators discovered that their camouflage techniques were even more effective in controlled environments than they had been in the jungle. The ship's internal atmosphere and artificial lighting actually enhanced the concealment properties of the mud and plant materials they used for visual camouflage. Saboteur Mi Young Song placed explosive charges throughout the enemy fleet using the same crystal-based technology that had proven undetectable to Vorthak equipment. The devices were programmed to trigger simultaneously, creating cascading system failures that would disable the ships without destroying them completely. "We want to capture their vessels intact if possible," Tae-ho had instructed. "Those ships represent our only way off this planet if the colony becomes uninhabitable." Mechanic Sang-ho Yoon worked his way through the flagship's engineering sections, placing subtle sabotage devices that would cause critical systems to fail at precisely calculated moments. His modifications would prevent the ship from maintaining orbit or targeting ground positions accurately. The Vorthak crews experienced increasingly severe system malfunctions as human saboteurs moved through their ships like ghosts. Navigation. Computers developed targeting errors that made precise bombardment impossible. Life support systems showed phantom readings that suggested massive crew casualties where no deaths had occurred. Commander Veltar stood on his flagship bridge and watched his tactical displays dissolve into chaos. Ship after ship reported critical system failures that prevented accurate targeting of surface positions. The orbital bombardment that should have been a simple technical operation had become a nightmare of cascading equipment malfunctions. "How can our most advanced warships suddenly develop simultaneous system failures?" Veltar demanded from his engineering staff. "These vessels conquered 17 civilizations. They cannot simply stop working for no reason." The answer came when Captain Tae-ho Kim stepped out of the shadows directly behind the alien commander's position. Veltar had been studying tactical displays for over an hour, while a human stood motionless 3 meters away, perfectly camouflaged against the ship's interior surfaces. "They're not malfunctioning," Tae-ho said quietly. "We've been aboard your ships for hours, disabling them from within." Veltar spun around in shock, his reptilian features showing pure terror at the realization that humans could become invisible even in controlled environments with advanced sensor coverage. The bridge's internal security systems showed no unauthorized personnel, yet a human had been standing within striking distance of the fleet commander. "Impossible," Veltar whispered. "Our sensors show no life signs. The bridge is secure." Other human figures began emerging from concealment positions throughout the flagship's command center. Lieutenant Bo-Ram Lee materialized from beside a weapons console. Engineer Dongwoo Choi became visible near the navigation station. Dr. So-Ra Park stepped away from the tactical display where she had been studying Vorthak fleet deployment patterns. The alien bridge crew found themselves surrounded by enemies who had been invisible moments before. Their weapons were useless, because they could not target opponents who seemed to appear and disappear at will. Security alerts could not track intruders who did not register on any detection equipment. Throughout the Vorthak fleet, similar scenes were occurring as human infiltration teams revealed themselves simultaneously. Assault Team Leader Bitna Cho took control of the second-largest warship. Sniper Team Leader Moon Young Kwan disabled the fleet's primary communication vessel. Demolitions expert Kyung-ho Lim captured the supply ships that carried ammunition for orbital bombardment. "Your technology is impressive," Dr. Sora Park said to Commander Veltar as she studied the flagship's technical systems. "But you never learned to see an enemy that doesn't want to be seen." She began broadcasting on all Vorthak communication frequencies, addressing the entire alien fleet with an explanation that would become legendary in galactic military history. "Commander Veltar, this is Dr. Sora Park of the New Sol Colony. We have taken control of your fleet using techniques that your species never developed. We do not possess supernatural abilities or advanced technology. We simply learn to use mud, plants, and patience better than any species in the galaxy." The message continued with a detailed explanation of human camouflage methods, revealing that the supernatural abilities that had terrorized Vorthak forces were actually applications of basic concealment techniques refined over millions of years of human evolution and warfare. "Your sensors are calibrated to detect enemies who fight with energy weapons and metal armor," Sora explained. "But humans learn to hunt and survive by becoming invisible to more dangerous predators. We developed camouflage, stealth, and deception into art forms long before we discovered space travel. The psychological impact on the Vorthak fleet was immediate and complete. The revelation that humans had defeated their most advanced military forces using primitive techniques was more devastating than any weapon. They had been conquered by an enemy that used mud and leaves instead of energy shields and plasma cannons. We offer you safe passage to leave this system immediately," Captain Tae-ho Kim announced over the fleet communications. "Take your ships and never return. This planet is under human protection, and we have proven that your technology cannot detect or defeat our defensive capabilities." Commander Veltar looked around his captured bridge and realized that his military career was effectively over. He would need to explain to Vorthak High Command how his forces had been defeated by primitive humans who possessed no advanced weapons or defensive systems. "How did you do this?" Veltar asked quietly. "Our intelligence reports indicated that humans were technologically inferior. You had no energy weapons, no defensive shields, no advanced detection equipment." "That's exactly why we won," Tae-ho replied. "You were prepared to fight an enemy that would use the same methods as your previous conquests, but humans never developed energy weapons because we learned that the deadliest weapon is often complete invisibility. The Vorthak evacuation began within hours as human-controlled vessels escorted the alien fleet to the edge of the star system. The conquered ships would remain under human control, providing the colonists with interstellar transportation and defensive capabilities." Colony leader Tae-ho Kim stood in the observation deck of the captured Vorthak flagship and watched the alien fleet disappear into hyperspace. The invasion that should have resulted in human slavery had instead provided the colony with advanced starships and a reputation that would spread throughout the galaxy. Dr. Sora Park continued her research into the planet's crystal formations, but now she understood that the most valuable discovery on Kepler 442b was not exotic energy technology,